Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're here to break down week 9 of the college football season. We are talking the main slate of DFS action on DraftKings and FanDuel, the noon Eastern time slate, the one with all the big prize pools and the most games. We are going to break down the games on this slate that you want to target to get guys into your DFS lineups for, and then we're going to break down the top plays at the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver positions to hopefully help you guys make the right plays and win some money here this week. Now, if you are new to the channel, go ahead and hit that like button. It'll help me out a lot. It helps videos get noticed, and I really do appreciate it. And hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be notified when all of our weekly golf, college football, and NFL content drops. And in about 2 weeks, we're going to be starting college basketball content as well. So if you hit that subscribe button, you will be notified when all those drop. If you're listening to the audio feed, you can subscribe as well and still get those notifications as well. So that does it for the introduction. So let's go ahead and start here talking week 9. We're going to talk about the games and situations that you want to be targeting for your lineup. All right, so looking at the board with all the totals here on FanDuel Sportsbook, there is not a whole lot of really, what's the word I'm looking for? Really juicy games here this weekend. There's a lot of projected blowouts, a lot of teams that are implied to score 35 plus points, but not a lot of them are playing a whole lot of good competition. So, this is going to be kind of a week where if you can pick and choose the teams that you target, pick and choose the games that you target, it can probably maximize your ceiling because there's going to be a lot of teams on this slate that just aren't going to score a whole lot of points. And playing those guys is probably just going to be a waste of your time. Now, one of the biggest blowouts on the slate is going to be Indiana at Penn State, 31.5 point spread with a total of only 45.5, meaning that the score is implied to be about 38-7 in favor of Penn State. That makes Indiana just entirely a cross-off team for me. I will not be playing any Hoosiers this week. Florida State, Wake Forest is another projected blowout. Wake Forest might be playing this game with a third-string quarterback. They might get Mitch Griffis back. That's currently undetermined. But Florida State's a 20-point favorite, total of 51.5. However, the Wake Forest offense has historically been pretty successful against Florida State. Wake has won 3 games in a row in this series, and at least 42 total points have been scored in the last 5 editions of this series. If Wake gets Mitch Griffis back, it might be worth entertaining some Wake Forest guys, but if they're playing with a third-string quarterback, they're going to be another cross-off team, in my opinion. Kansas State is another one that's projected to win by a blowout. They're projected to win about 39-22. About 38-21 against Houston. Just Kansas State, though, is not really a situation that's very targetable in DFS right now. They play 2 quarterbacks, Will Howard and Avery Johnson, and until one of those guys is playing 100% of snaps, they become very difficult to predict and very tough to play with a whole lot of confidence when they're rotating 2 quarterbacks in and out. Now, another one that's going to be intriguing is Texas versus BYU. This one is currently implied to be about 33-17 no, I did the math wrong there because the odds actually changed. We're going to go with 35-16 in favor of Texas. Pretty much Texas is playing with a backup quarterback, Malik Murphy. And so this is going to be kind of a different Longhorn offense than what you're used to seeing. But Texas is still going to have the advantage up front. Malik Murphy, still a former super talented recruit coming in. And if Malik Murphy doesn't get off to a hot start, the fans are going to be clamoring for Arch Manning down there on the 40 acres. Another one that's going to be targetable, and I believe I scrolled past it, is Notre Dame taking on Pitt. Notre Dame is currently implied 33-13 in this game against the Pitt Panthers. So definitely a situation that is targetable there. Only on the Irish side, not really on the Pitt side. Now, there are 3 shootout games that I want to mention. Remember, when I define a shootout, I'm looking for a game that is around a 1-possession spread and a total of over 50. I kind of had to cheat a little bit on this one because some of these spreads are like 10 points. The first one is going to be USC versus Cal, total of 67.5, which is the highest on the slate. USC is 10.5-point favorites, so this game is projected to be about 38-28 USC. The game last year that these 2 teams played was 41-35. So obviously that was a shootout where you could get guys in from both teams. Definitely a game worth targeting there, USC versus Cal. The other one is going to be Oklahoma versus Kansas. This game is implied to be Oklahoma 38-28 as well. This is another game where last year it was a big time shootout. The game was 52-42 in favor of Oklahoma. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, last year Kansas had Jalen Daniels. This year they're going to have Jason Bean. How does that impact things? Well, last year it was actually Jason Bean that started that game and put up 42 points against the Sooners defense. So this is definitely another game that is targetable. It's actually a quarterback matchup that is repeating itself from last year. So I definitely think that both those teams are going to be able to score some points. And then probably the most likely game to shoot out, in my opinion, because neither of these teams can really stop the run, is West Virginia and Central Florida. Only a 7-point spread, which is less than the previous two. Total of 59.5. So it's projected to be about 33 to 26 in favor of UCF. Both of these teams are teams that love to run the football, and they're teams that can't stop the run, which is a good combination for maybe creating some explosive plays, some quick touchdowns, and this game just going back and forth in shootout fashion. I think this is the one that, at the end of the day, is probably the most likely to be like a 48 to 45 type of game. The most likely to shootout game, in my opinion, would be West Virginia and Central Florida. All right, so let's go ahead and carry on now with our analysis of the quarterback position. So Caleb Williams has been kind of struggling a little bit lately, and he is in a good bounce back spot though, because if you look at it, his two games that he struggled were against Notre Dame and Utah, did not eclipse 19 fantasy points in either of them. And the bottom line is Cal does not have a defense like Notre Dame or Utah. Those are probably two of the top 10 defenses in all FBS football. Cal is not. So to me, I kind of like that we're getting a price dip on Caleb Williams in a spot where he's going up against the worst defense that he's seen in probably a month. And in my opinion, he is the most likely quarterback to finish the slate as the highest scoring quarterback. Last year against Cal, he put up 43 DraftKings points. I think he's in an absolute smash spot. I think he's the top play on the slate, and I think he can actually be played unstacked, which we're going to talk about when we get to the wide receiver position. A little bit of tease there for you. Now, the next quarterback on the board is Bo Nix, and I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be kind of out on Bo Nix. He had a season low of 13 fantasy points against Utah last year. That was just a low-scoring game that didn't feature, a whole lot of success through the air for the Ducks. And Utah is coming off of a game where they just held Caleb Williams to 18.9 fantasy points. So if Caleb Williams can't get the 20 fantasy points against Utah, and Bo Nix didn't get to 15 fantasy points last year against Utah, what makes you think that this year is going to be any different? I just don't really have a whole lot of optimism for this one. I wish we were getting a price discount, knowing that he was going up against one of the best defenses in the country. But he's a guy that I'm just going to be out on. However, one thing I say often in these DFS podcasts is sometimes a bad play becomes a good play when nobody's playing him. And so if everybody knows that Bo Nix is playing Utah this week and everybody's out on him, he might be a super low owned sneaky GPP play that maybe on the off chance that he does have a lot of success does really well for you because nobody else is going to be on him. Dylan Gabriel is another guy worth talking about because last year against Kansas, he absolutely lit them up. He threw for 400 yards and had 35 fantasy points against them last year. His last game against UCF was not great. It was a season low of 23 fantasy points. But what we do like to see is that he still had double-digit rushing attempts. He still had 38 passing attempts. So the volume is still there. Like the potential is still there. He just didn't run for a touchdown, and he didn't get his 300-yard bonus on DraftKings. So definitely, he's got a higher ceiling than he showed last week, and he can definitely hit that ceiling against a Kansas Jayhawks defense that he had a lot of success against last year. Jordan Travis is another guy that I'm interested in. I don't think he has quite the ceiling of a Gabriel or a Caleb Williams this week, but I also think he's going to come in a little under-owned. Which makes him a little bit intriguing. And if Florida State absolutely boat races Wake, then there's a good possibility that Jordan Travis is going to get you 25 to 30 fantasy points. But he doesn't have the same rushing upside of Gabriel or Williams, and he really doesn't hit his 300-yard bonus on DraftKings as often as Williams or Gabriel. So I don't think he has the pure ceiling of them two, but I do think in terms of an ownership and a points per dollar play, there's an argument to be made that Jordan Travis is a pretty good play. As we mentioned from the top, Will Howard and Avery Johnson of Kansas State are just unplayable at this point. If the coaching staff names a starter and that guy is going to play all of the snaps, then I might become interested. But when they're both splitting snaps, it's just a pass for me. Another guy that I do like is Garrett Green of West Virginia. As we mentioned, UCF cannot stop the run. They're one of the worst run defenses in college football, giving up 196 yards per game. Now, you're probably thinking, Mike, why are you mentioning that when you're talking about a quarterback? Well, if you look at Garrett Green's stats, he's averaging 14 rushing attempts per game in his last 3 games. He's had at least 12 in his last 3 games, 4 rushing touchdowns in his last 3 games. And West Virginia is one of the run-heaviest offenses in all of college football, and they use Garrett Green as their second leading ball carrier. So pretty much you're getting a guy who this is his type of matchup, right? If they can't stop the run, it's going to be good things for Garrett Green, who is used in the run game. So I definitely think Garrett Green has a high ceiling. I think this game is likely to shoot out. And I'd really, really like Garrett Green of the West Virginia Mountaineers this week. Another guy that I like is Donovan Smith of Houston. I think, quite frankly, he's just a misprice. He's averaging pretty much the same amount of fantasy points per game as Bo Nix, but is about $2,000 cheaper on DraftKings. And if you look at it, he's had at least 26 fantasy points in his last 3 games. That's a number that Bo Nix has only topped twice this season. So I don't get why Donovan Smith is priced down here as far as he is. He does not give you a whole lot of rushing upside. He's athletic, but he doesn't really use his legs a whole lot. But what you're getting with Donovan Smith is a guy who's probably going to get 40 plus pass attempts, is probably going to hit his 300-yard bonus. And if he gets to multiple touchdowns, then you're going to have a guy that really is going to pay off this salary. I really do like Donovan Smith this week. And I don't think that the Kansas State defense is as good as the Texas defense that he saw last week. And hey, if you can put up 27 fantasy points against Texas, you can put up 27 fantasy points against pretty much everybody. So I like Donovan Smith this week taking on Kansas State. Now, another guy that I do like this week, Bryson Barnes of Utah, is the fill-in starter with Cam Rising still out. And I don't know if Cam Rising is going to end up playing this season or not. But Bryson Barnes, he's a little bit of a dual threat. He got 32 fantasy points against USC last week. I don't think that he's going to have as much success against Oregon as he had against USC. But I think he's a little bit of a sneaky play at an affordable price tag. Now, one guy in the 7K range that I really do like is John Reese Plumlee of UCF. So he was back returning from injury fully against Oklahoma and got 23.5 fantasy points. It's pretty solid. He's another guy that I think is a misprice because he's going to use his legs quite a lot. And again, two teams that can't stop the run, two quarterbacks that love to run. I think this is a great combination and a great game stacking environment for John Reese Plumlee, as well as the aforementioned Garrett Green. Malik Murphy of Texas, to me, is a high upside play. If you were to just pencil in Quinn Ewers' production at a price tag of $7,000 on DraftKings, we would absolutely take that from Malik Murphy. However, the play calling it concerns me a little bit. After Murphy entered the game against Houston, Texas ran 9 offensive plays. 7 of them were runs. They were clearly trying to limit his passing ability. One of the passes was a bubble screen. But hey, now he's got a full week to game plan, a full week to come in and prepare as the starter. So if they open up the full playbook to Malik Murphy, there's no reason that he can't absolutely smash at that salary of only $7,000. However, like we said on the game environments, though, he's got to come out hot or else they're really going to be clamoring for Arch Manning to come into the game. Now, in terms of super affordable quarterbacks, there are a few of them that I like. Jason Bean of Kansas had 26 fantasy points against Oklahoma last year, had a season high of 37.6 fantasy points against Oklahoma State last week. I think Jason Bean's in a pretty good spot. He is a guy that is mobile but hasn't really used his legs yet this season. And he's got a good game environment against Oklahoma. If this game turns into a shootout, it would be really, really nice to have both Gabriel and Jason Bean as your two quarterbacks. And I think Jason Bean's at a salary that is absolutely affordable. So I really do like Jason Bean this week. And then the last one is going to be another game stack piece. Cal has been pretty much rotating quarterbacks all season, but they seem to have settled in on freshman Fernando Mendoza. And he has had 2 starts against really good defenses in Oregon State and Utah, and he's put up 23 and 13 fantasy points in those 2. Well, USC is not that defense. Like, USC's defense is not good. So I think Fernando Mendoza is in a pretty good spot at an affordable salary that he can come in and you can play him as a cheap quarterback. You can pair him with Caleb Williams and get a game stack. I think he's a really solid option at a really, really affordable price tag. All right, that does it for the quarterbacks. So let's go ahead and take a quick breather and then talk about some running backs. All right, so if you are sitting there thinking, well, Mike, all this information is great, but who actually makes your lineups? Well, there are a few places that you can get more information from me. And also, I'm sitting here recording this on a Wednesday morning. Sometimes injury news and opinions can change, as the week goes on. And so if you want more from me as the week goes on, there's a few places you can find me. First off, follow me on X at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out the DFS rundown for every college football Saturday slate. It just kind of gives my quick thoughts on the slate. If there's injury news or player pricing or stuff like that I find, I generally tweet it out. Also, I'm in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube and on the podcast feed now. But the Fantasy Corner Discord, it's a lot of guys that play a lot of DFS, are really smart. We talk all sports in there, NFL, golf, college football, and there's a lot of really sharp guys in NBA in there that have helped me get a lot better at NBA. And NBA is a hard game to play DFS for. So join the Fantasy Corner Discord if you want to get in on the discussion. And then I also write a full article about every main college football slate. That is available on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike'sMoneyPicks. I give a full breakdown where I go over my core, I go over situations to target, ownership, kind of discussions, but it's a full breakdown of the slate. You can get it on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike'sMoneyPicks. And if you're looking to try anything new this college football season, maybe it's a new DFS site, a new player prop site like Underdog or Prize Picks, or maybe just a new sports book, head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike'sPicks. We're partnered with SignUpExpert. And so what you get is the best offers and promo codes for new users on any type of DFS player prop or sportsbook site. And it'll sync to your location. So it'll only show you what is available to you in your state. And basically it helps me out as well because you're using my links and showing me some support as well. So it works for you and it works for me. Give it a shot if you're looking to try anything new this season. All right, so let's go ahead and break down the running back position now. So the top price running back on the board is Audric Estime of Notre Dame. And I don't mind it, but I really do wish he was cheaper. Like in terms of price tag adjusted plays, I think he's a little too expensive, but I do like the play. He's going to get probably 18 to 20 touches. He's probably going to score a touchdown. If he gets you that 100-yard bonus and he gets you another touchdown, you're in really good shape with Audric Estime. And I think he has a good chance of doing that against Pitt. Jaden Ott is another interesting one. He's a true workhorse back going up against USC. Last two games, he's played tough defenses against Utah and Oregon State. And, he's still averaged over 5 yards a carry in both of those games. So I think he's in pretty good shape with this matchup. He's not really ceding a whole lot of carries to any other runners right now. And if you're looking to play a game stack with this USC Cal game, I definitely see the value in going Caleb Williams. Instead of playing the Cal quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, you can go Caleb Williams and you can go Jaden Ott and hope that Cal just scores all their touchdowns on the ground. I definitely think that is a possible play. Now, Bucky Irving of Utah is an interesting case because he left Saturday's game early against Washington State, but every indication seems to be that he's going to be able to play this week against Utah. Look, injury reporting in college football is an absolute mess. I wish they would do like the NFL and just make it mandatory where all teams have to report the status of all their players because basically, every team has a beat reporter, and that beat reporter is going to be at least one practice a week. However, if the head coach doesn't want the beat reporter to disclose any type of information, the beat reporter doesn't. So it doesn't really help us out if, there's this information available that college coaches just aren't disclosing and the NCAA isn't making them disclose it. I don't blame them for not disclosing it because the NCAA isn't making them. But anyway, that's a discussion for another place in time. Bucky Irving, all indications are that he's going to play this week. If he does play, I have very minimal interest in him. If he does not play, I do think that Jordan James, the backup, is very intriguing. We've never seen Jordan James get really like a full workload. And if he does, he would be the more intriguing play to me as opposed to Bucky Irving. Now, Jonathan Brooks of Texas is my number one running back play, ignoring price, ignoring anything else. If you were to ask me who finishes the slate as the top scoring running back, I think it's Jonathan Brooks of Texas. So you're looking at a guy who is averaging 20 rushing attempts in his last 5 games. He's also used through the air. He's caught 13 passes in his last 2 games combined, 8 last week. So you're seeing a guy with a huge workload with a backup quarterback playing where clearly they didn't want to throw the ball a whole lot with him in the game last week. And so Brooks has incredible upside. He's an easy click in cash games, in my opinion, just because of the floor that he gives as well as the upside that he gives. And also CJ Baxter, the backup running back, I think is a very intriguing GPP play in DFS. He's only $4,200. Last week against Houston, he only got 6 carries, but he made good work of them. He got 42 yards, scored a touchdown, used through the air as well. If Texas ends up going to more of a committee, CJ Baxter will probably absolutely hit value at that very cheap price tag. I do like CJ Baxter and Jonathan Brooks this week. And honestly, CJ Baxter might, when all's said and done, be the more talented back. So as much as I like Jonathan Brooks, if you're playing GPPs, you're looking to be different, CJ Baxter is a way that you can get different. Now, going back to my injury reporting rant, Jawar Jordan is very, very questionable for this game against Duke. And Jawar Jordan has been a great running back in fantasy so far this year. He is a home run hitter. He breaks off long runs pretty much every week. And so he's absolutely in play if he does play. If he does not play, Isaac Garendo becomes a very easy click for me at only $4,800. Last week against Pitt, he got 13 carries, 38 yards, 2 touchdowns, a smooth 21.9 fantasy points, in a game that Jawar Jordan left early. So if Jordan does not go, Garendo is an easy play. The only bad news is that this game's a 3:30 kickoff, so your options for late swap are going to be limited if you plan on swapping in Garendo late. Trey Benson of Florida State, if you look at it, is a true boom or bust play. You look at his game log, he's had games of 4, 9, and 6, and then he's also had games of 39 and 28. So you don't really know what you're going to get with him, but he does have incredible upside. If you're playing GPPs and you're just looking for a guy who has a chance to hit his ceiling, it might be Trey Benson. Just know you could also get another 4 fantasy point outing. Not my type of play, but he is a guy that does have a high ceiling. Devin Neal of Kansas is a guy that I can absolutely see the argument for either way, whether you think he is a good play or a bad play. The argument that he is a good play is that Oklahoma is not a great run defense. Jonathan Brooks and RJ Harvey have ran for 100 yards on them in back-to-back games. However, the downside is Devin Neal is splitting carries with Daniel Highshaw. So if, quote unquote, Kansas RB rushes for 100 yards, that doesn't necessarily mean Devin Neal is going to rush for 100 yards because Devin Neal might get 60 of it and Highshaw might get 40 of it. So if you play Devin Neal, you're going to be banking on, him being the one that finds the end zone, not Highshaw. Him being the one who's used in the passing game, not Highshaw. And if you get those two things, then he's got a lot of upside and a really good opportunity against Oklahoma. But with the fact that he's in such a split, it's really hard to get excited about Devin Neal, in my opinion. Now, speaking of RJ Harvey, I think he's in a really good spot taking on West Virginia. He is a workhorse back for the UCF Knights. He's gotten over 16 attempts in each of his last 3 games, and he's gotten over 100 yards in his last 2 games. And he's going against a run defense now in West Virginia that is just straight not good. And so I absolutely think he is in a good spot this week. Now, his backup, not his backup. On the other side of this game in West Virginia, you've got CJ Donaldson Jr., who I also think is in a good spot. Again, UCF is a bad run defense, so play the running back going up against a bad run defense, right? CJ Donaldson's gotten double-digit attempts in every game so far this season. He scored a touchdown in all but 1 game so far this season, so I definitely like him to hit his upside here against UCF. Now, Donaldson he does have a backup that intrigues me at $3,900. Justin Johnson Jr. came back from injury last week against Oklahoma State, had 14 carries, 72 yards, and a touchdown. If you're playing GPPs and you're looking for just a punt play, a guy who might have some upside at a very cheap price tag, Justin Johnson Jr. might be your guy in that department. Now, another interesting situation is going to be Jaquindon Jackson and Sione Vaki of Utah. So Jaquindon Jackson, in the last 2 games, has averaged 24 attempts. He's led the team in carries each of the last 2 games. He's also averaging over 100 yards in the last 2 games. So Jaquindon Jackson, even going up against the Oregon defense that's pretty good, I still think Jaquindon Jackson's in a pretty good spot because of his workload. But Utah is also supporting 2 running backs. Sione Vaki is being used as a running back, and he came into the season as a safety. So Travis Hunter is no longer the only two-way player in the Pac-12. Sione Vaki is a safety who is playing running back, and he has total 24 attempts in each of the last 2 games. He has also caught 5 passes last game, scored 2 touchdowns, so maybe that's a little bit fluky. But he's definitely a guy that has some upside in a Utah offense that's going to feature these 2 guys because these 2 guys are just their best playmakers. So I absolutely think that Jaquindon Jackson and Sione Vaki are both in good spots heading into this week. And last guy I'm going to talk about is going to be Le'Veon Moss of Texas A&M. Look, he really hasn't done a whole lot with it, but Le'Veon Moss is the workhorse back now in Texas A&M. He's gotten at least 15 carries in each of the last 4 games. He's not really competing with other guys for carries anymore. And I think he's just a solid play going up against the South Carolina team who's been pretty bad on defense. But Le'Veon Moss is going to be getting the opportunities. And even though the game log is kind of ugly, I think he's going to do better with those opportunities this week than he has in the previous weeks. All right, that does it for the running back positions. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's talk about some wide receivers. All right, so first piece of advice I can always give when it comes to wide receivers is, in general, stack your receivers with your quarterbacks. If you like your quarterback a lot, then you should probably be playing one wide receiver with him at least because they're both probably going to get home if the quarterback has a good game. Now, the obvious stacking partner in all college football right now is Troy Franklin of Oregon. He has been Bo Nix's number 1 wide receiver all season long. He's had a great season so far, and if you're playing Bo Nix, he's a guy that you kind of got to play with him. But he's really expensive, and he's got to match up against a tough defense. And so I'm kind of out on him unless, going with a true game stack, or unless, I'm making a Bo Nix lineup, I'm probably out on Troy Franklin. Tez Johnson is a guy in this receiving core who is gaining steam. So if you want to save a little bit of salary and you are playing Bo Nix, Tez Johnson's a guy who's caught 13 passes in the last 2 games, and you can definitely pair him with Bo Nix as well at a much cheaper price tag than Troy Franklin. Now, another situation to monitor is the Georgia pass catchers, because Brock Bowers is going to be out for the next month or so. And someone on Georgia has to fill the target void that is going to be left by Brock Bowers. Like, you're looking at essentially 10 targets a game that somebody's got to pick up. Now, they're not all probably going to go to the same guy, but there's going to be an increase in workload for the Georgia wideouts. So I think the natural candidate is going to be Dominic Lovett. He plays out of the slot, which is not that dissimilar from tight end in that most of his targets go into the middle of the field. They're not, going wide down the sideline. And he had 9 catches last week against Vanderbilt. That's a pretty solid workload, right? 10 targets in that game as well. So I really do think Dominic Lovett might be the most natural beneficiary of Brock Bowers being out. But don't discount Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey was their best wide receiver last year. He is back fully healthy now. He apparently has a full workload. So if you get a full snap share at a Ladd McConkey, he might just end up being the guy who ends up emerging as the alpha in this receiving core. And then the other guy that I'm looking at is going to be Oscar Delp, who is Brock Bowers' backup tight end. Now, this is not to say that Oscar Delp is going to immediately come in and be Brock Bowers. Like, that's not what's going to happen. This is kind of like if Travis Kelce were out in the NFL. This is kind of like playing Noah Gray. You're getting a guy who is the backup, knows the offense, is going to be in that situation, but probably not have the same production. And at only $3,400 on DraftKings, I can certainly think of worse plays that you can make. Now, the Florida State wide receivers are pretty interesting. I think they're one of the best wide receiver duos in college football, Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. And if Johnny Wilson misses, Keon Coleman has an incredibly high ceiling. We don't know if Wilson is going to play or not, but the last time that Johnny Wilson was out, Keon Coleman went for 9 catches, 140 yards, and a touchdown, get for 32 fantasy points on DraftKings. So if Johnny Wilson is out, I really do like Keon Coleman. Now, also, if Wilson is out, there are 2 kind of punt plays I think you can make. Destin Hill is a guy who is questionable, but he stands to benefit if Johnny Wilson is out. And then Marqueston Douglas is another guy who could benefit if Johnny Wilson is out. So I don't think those are necessarily like super like rock solid steady plays, but there's certainly punt plays that you could make if you need to conserve salary and you're looking for guys who are going to be in for a bigger workload than usual. Now, the USC wide receivers are probably the most frustrating to look at on DraftKings. And the reason why is it seems like 2 of them never get home in the same game. Like you never look at a game where 2 USC wide receivers have 100 yards receiving, or 2 USC wide receivers score 2 touchdowns each. Like, that just doesn't happen. And DraftKings is kind of cruel in the fact that they've got like all of them priced up, like more so than they need to be, because these guys don't really produce that much. So Taj Washington has probably been the most dependable guy all season. He's the guy who's most likely to break a big play all season long. Last week against Utah, he was their best receiver, 5 for 112, 19.2 fantasy points on DraftKings. He's probably the most solid guy there is, but I still think he's overpriced. Brendan Rice, the son of the GOAT Jerry Rice, is probably been the most consistent target earner over the last month and a half of the season. But even he is overpriced at $6,400. I think if I were playing Caleb Williams, I would probably pair him with either Washington or Rice, or I would go all the way down the board. And Michael Jackson III is a punt play. He's not a full-time wide receiver, but when he's out there, they tend to throw to him. And so at only $3,100, I think there's certainly worse plays you could make than that. But I think most of this receiving core is pretty ugly to play on DraftKings. And it's a situation where if I'm playing Caleb Williams, I'm fine playing him unstacked, or I'm probably just going to pick one of these guys because 2 of them never end up getting home. Now, on the Cal side of things, if you're looking for this game to truly shoot out and looking for a run back, Ty Davis has been their most productive receiver over the last month of the season. 5, 6, and 7 catches in his last 3 games. 12 fantasy points or more in his last 3 games, and he's at a very affordable price tag at only $4,900. He would be the guy I would look at if you're looking to full-on game stack at this Cal and USC games. Now, there are some teams that are easier to figure out than USC is. Thank the Lord for that. Houston is one of the easiest receiving cores in the nation to figure out. They pretty much play only three guys, and all three of those guys produce every week. Matthew Golden was the guy that came into the season projected to be the number one wide receiver, and he finally looked like it against Texas with 7 for 88 and 2 touchdowns. Samuel Brown had been kind of operating as the number one wide receiver, and he still had a decent game against Texas, 4 catches, 80 yards, no touchdowns though. And then John Manjack was the guy who really benefited. Really had a good game against Texas last week. 6 for 88 and a touchdown, 20 fantasy points on DraftKings. If you've never seen Manjack play, he's an interesting guy to watch. He plays without gloves, which like no receivers do now. And I don't know what the advantage of doing that is, because those gloves are almost like having stickum because they just have that extra stick to them. But Manjack plays without gloves and he does it well. He gets a lot of targets. And so, this Houston receiving core, you can play any of those three guys. If you're playing Donovan Smith, I think you can even play 2 of them, because if he gets a 300-yard game, it's very likely that 2 of those guys get home. And it's a very easy situation to target when they're pretty much only throwing to those 3 guys. Oklahoma is another team that is pretty much now only throwing to 3 guys with Andrel Anthony out for the season. You got Jalil Farouk, who is probably their most explosive athlete and their best after the catch guy. A little bit of a disappointment against UCF after a big game against Texas, but I do like Farouk's potential against Kansas of breaking off a big play. You've got Drake Stoops, who's the target in the slot, gets a lot of short intermediate targets. I think if you play Drake Stoops, you're going to be counting on him scoring a touchdown because his yardage totals never seem to be that big. And then you got Nick Anderson, who seemed to be like all he does is score touchdowns guy. And then last week, he still scores 2 touchdowns, and he's playing more snaps with Andrel Anthony being out. And so Nick Anderson is in a really good spot, and he's the cheapest of the 3 of them. I think all 3 of them are in play. I would probably rank them Anderson, Farouk, Stoops in my personal opinion. But I think all 3 of them are in play against Kansas. Texas is another team that is easy to target because they pretty much only play 3 wide receivers and 1 tight end. It's going to be Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, and Jordan Whittington at receiver, with Jatavion Sanders as the tight end. Now, their game plan is going to be a little bit different with Malik Murphy under center as opposed to Quinn Ewers. I expect less deep shots in the passing game, which you might think would impact Xavier Worthy the most because he is their deep threat wide receiver, but they will still get Xavier Worthy the ball on screens, on jet sweeps, on these short little throws, and on RPOs. So I do think Xavier Worthy still has a legitimate floor and a high ceiling, especially if he makes a man miss and breaks one of these for a long touchdown. And then Jordan Whittington is the other guy that they will get the ball to in screens, in short passes, because he's really good after the catch. He can make a guy miss and get a big play. Adonai Mitchell is the guy who I think loses the most without Quinn Ewers because he kind of is dependent on intermediate and deep passes to score. He's not the guy that they're going to use in the short, quick passing game. So I would probably rank it Worthy, Whittington, Mitchell. To Jatavion Sanders, I don't know if he's still fully healthy from injuring that ankle back earlier in the season. To me, he is a touchdown-dependent play, but he's at a cheap price tag. There's certainly worse plays on the board than that, and he's going to be out there like all the time. Now, in terms of not talking about a team's full receiving core, there are a few one-offs that I do find pretty interesting. First is Jamari Thrash of Louisville. I think he is straight up a misprice. He's still averaging 21.6 fantasy points on the season. He even scored 20 fantasy points against Notre Dame, which is something that not even Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to do. He is going to be a target monster in this Jeff Brom offense. Decent matchup against Duke. Decent price tag at only $6,100. I really do like Jamari Thrash as a one-off play. You can play him with the Louisville quarterback, play him without the Louisville quarterback. He's a reasonable price tag with a massive workload. I like Jamari Thrash this week. Now, Notre Dame, the team I just mentioned, actually, their target leader is their tight end, Mitchell Evans, at $5,400. However, he's not been super consistent all season, but he has shown some upside. If he ends up scoring, then you're going to get a pretty decent performance out of Mitchell Evans. And he's only scored 1 touchdown on 24 catches this week. So I definitely think there's worse spots you could go in with Mitchell Evans. Like, I think he's a solid play at $5,400 on DraftKings. And then Jaden Thomas is kind of turning into their number 1 wideout. He just hasn't really been fully healthy. So I think he's a high upside, high risk play. But if he shows up and is their number 1 wideout like we all think he's going to be, then he's going to be a pretty solid play also. Now, the UCF and West Virginia game, I mentioned this as being one of the most stackable games on the slate. UCF is another team that only plays 3 wide receivers, Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson, Xavier Townsend. Javon Baker is the alpha. He would be the guy that I would prefer out of all of them. But I'm really interested in a guy on the West Virginia side, and that is going to be Devin Carter. So Hudson Clement is likely to miss this game like he did last week. And with Hudson Clement out, Devin Carter went for 3 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but 14 fantasy points out of a guy who's only $5,100, we will take that any day of the week. And so Devin Carter is a guy that I think feels a little underpriced in a game environment that's going to be great and should have a little bit of an expanded role if Hudson Clement does end up missing this game. Now, South Carolina is another interesting situation to look at. Their top 3 wide receivers, Leggett, Wells, and Brown, are all questionable to doubtful. If I had to handicap it, I kind of think that at most one of these guys ends up playing. I don't think Brown plays, and I think Wells and Leggett are both about 50-50 calls. I don't think that all 3 of them play. So in that chance, Trey Knox is the guy that seems to, benefit the most. He's got 20 catches in his last 3 games, 5, 8, and 7. So he's been a pretty consistent contributor with the health of these wide receivers being in question. He's only $4,000 on DraftKings. Obviously, wait until you get news about the status of Leggett and Wells. But Trey Knox is a very interesting play to me if those guys are in fact out. And then Nick Harbor is another guy who stands to benefit if those guys are out. Had 2 catches for 50 yards last week, also got a carry. And I think he would be another guy that would benefit if all the other South Carolina receivers are in fact out of this game. All right, so that does it for the wide receiver position. And that does it for this episode. Hopefully, I was able to give you guys a lot of information that you can use to find the right guys this week, to get into your lineups and help make you some money on DraftKings and FanDuel. Remember, if you want more from me, follow me on X at Mike's Money Picks. Discussion in the Fantasy Corner Discord for all sports, not just college football. Link is in the description. And my full slate articles are on Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button. It helps me out a lot, helps the videos get noticed, and I really do appreciate it. And hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified when all of our weekly golf, college football, NFL, and coming soon college basketball content drops. That is it for this episode, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Best of luck to you this week, and I will see you next time.